with no utility in the world. Every word the modern uses refers to a form of self-masturbation. It's self-referential. For instance, even the source of modern's greatest pride, that is access to sexual satisfaction, gratification, is nothing more than a form of masturbation using other as just an organ, a tool, a toy to self-gratify. There will be no consequences, no long-term effects. So he or she will not have to be too stringent with his choices. All that matters is that he gets off, that he expunges all this repressed anxiety, all this repressed, controlled, contained libidinal energies in the form of stress, which is part of a mechanism he refuses to contemplate or understand. He just feels it and is driven to expunge it, to expel it from him. And that he feels the most proud of. This sense of collecting energies due to sheltering, which come easy, and then expunging them. So the expansion, the expelling of energies become his only form of pride. This is why moderns always brag about their sexual exploits, or how they impressed using extraordinary feats of no use, no meaning other than impressing, of making an impact, of drawing attention to oneself. The worst thing you can ask of a nihilist, a modern, is for him or her to explain and define the words he is using. They will be incapable of doing so because their ideas are based on emotions, not on reasons. If they do dare to try to define the words they are using, you will soon discover how vague they are, how empty of substance, in emotionalism, in hope giving, in sentimentality, in a desire to preserve, to protect, to belong, to be popular, to impress as many others as possible, to preserve the potential for pleasure, to evade the need suffering, which is the experience of existing. Being only slightly above the cognitive levels of higher life forms, the modern believes that he's being empathic, that is, he's getting into somebody's mind when he's simply projecting. And this mistake results in the opposite effect. That is, in trying to avenge himself against those that have gotten into his head, he projects more of himself outwards. He exposes more of himself openly because he has no talent for empathizing. He cannot eliminate the self from his analysis. He cannot be objective. He has not risen above the third level of cognition. So whenever he attempts to imagine how the other might be thinking or what his motives might be, he is simply placing himself out there and exposing himself, dropping his pants, as it were. With no other way to measure, to evaluate, to discover value, to perceive quality, the modern evaluates it using quantities. The more, the better. With quantities, quantities are his standard for measuring his own self-worth. In all things, he displays this desire for more and more, independent of any quality. The symbol is a representation of opposites, a synthesis of external sources of stimulation and internal sources of stimulation, of the fluid converted into static models. The flux interpreted as static, as whole abstraction, as a synthesis between the ideal, the idea, and the real. It could lean in either direction. If it leans towards the ideal, it tends towards nihilism. If it leans towards the real, it tends towards realism. If it goes too far towards the ideal, then it negates the real. And if it leans too far towards the real, it negates the ideal and surrenders to the flux as the process towards annihilation. Duality in the binary system of thinking, of conceptualizing, is rooted in an off-on switch of cellular activity. When a neural pulse passes through a nervous cluster, a nerve cluster, that is the on. If no neural pulse passes through it, that is the off. In other words, it really means a different degree of activity in relation to a hypothetical static self. Since the emergence of the organism, the unity, is not a conscious decision, the conscious mind awakens to self. It discovers self as if it were just part of the world, just another phenomenon. So the first relationship of self to self is one of antagonism, of alienation. And for some, this alienation remains throughout their lives because integration never happens. The purpose of philosophy is to create a convergence, a unification, to promote a slow merger, where the merger is never completed because the completion of the self would be an end in itself. So this is where the paradox emerges, where the individual seeks a higher merger, a higher unity, while at the same time does not desire a closure, a final completion. And here again, self-consciousness awakens the brain, the mind, to the antagonism within the self, because even in the self there is no completion, there is no harmony. The attraction repulsion that is true of phenomenon outside the self is true of the phenomena inside the self. In other words, the different organs. In many ways, the different organs are at odds with one another. They are competing with one another. The word, the number, the sign, is really a representation of the nervous system, which acts as the nexus between mind and body. As such, the symbol cannot help but be mystical, cannot help but be mystifying. Understanding usually results in a simplification of this understanding, whereas simple minds unnecessarily complicate concepts. First, to hide their own simplicity or their own lies, the lies hidden within their complexities, and second, to express the confusion in their minds without really understanding them, repeating them as if they were repeating them from memory, because they are parroting concepts without understanding them, presenting them with no personal participation, no personal contribution. You can always differentiate the two by their ability to use different metaphors to explain the same concept. The simpleton, unable to fully comprehend the concept, will repeat the same metaphors, whereas the one who does understand will use different imagery, will come at the same idea from different vantage points, will use different symbols to represent the same concept, adding each time a different dimension to it, a different nuance. So the mind that understands begins with a simple symbol and then perhaps expands upon this base, this foundation, using other symbols, other metaphors as ornaments. Whereas the simpleton begins with the ornament because he lacks substance, because he can't understand, he can't express these concepts, cannot justify them, cannot define them. He begins with the impressive ornament, hoping that the other will not delve deeper to see how shallow his understanding of these concepts are. In this age of information overload with the internet and books and other sources of data collection, we find the curious character who regurgitates data from memory, which sometimes is impressive, without truly understanding them. He is unable to find a pattern in the data. He just repeats them as he found them, raw, hoping that they will impress the other. His goal is not really to understand. His goal is really to impress. And this harkens us back to the what we talked about with the ornament, the self-handicapping, where excess, where an organism displays an excessiveness which is self-destructive, is self-hampering, but in order to create a momentary impression, to produce a momentary advantage. The simple mind is obsessed with the source more so than with the information coming from the source. In his mind, discrediting the source somehow makes the information coming from the source disappear, or it reduces it to insignificance. This is his biggest error. And if we witness intellectual, quote unquote, conversations between simpletons, you will find that the personality, the personas of each, are heavily involved. They are rather the focus, the centerpiece, and the concepts are really just the covering, the excuse. They are really talking about themselves and trying to talk about the other in order to slander him, to character assassinate them, because it's really a competition between egos, and deciphering the world is of secondary importance to them. It's more trying to gather followers to impress as many as possible. The hedonist, having been disconnected from the world, having been protected from it, finds in the sensation of pleasure his greatest objective. The nihilist, having disconnected from world and protected from it, becoming more and more indifferent to it, childlike, discovers in God and the projection of an absolute his objective. And the word as the symbol of this abstraction becomes his centerpiece. The modern, the secular modern, unable to come to terms with the previous method, discovers in the word itself a means to an end. The number, the word, it takes the place of God. It becomes his objective. And because he is a nihilist and he can detach from the world with no severe consequences, the word can be anything at any time. It doesn't matter what it is. All that it matters is how much pleasure it promises. how much potential it offers. And because he has no other way of justifying and validating this, he attempts to gather a following. Because by gathering a following, he validates his own lies and converts his disease into a new definition of health. I've said elsewhere that anxiety, with fear being the most extreme of this extreme form of anxiety, is the mother of all emotions. And with the case of respect, we see this anxiety towards the idea of losing a source. So we respect that which gives us something, and we don't want to lose it as a source, whether this other is a source of friendship, a source of support, love, sexual gratification, or even learning, information, data. It doesn't matter what it is. So respect is really an expression of dependency, and its most noble form, it is also an expression of gratitude towards the source, so that even when we surpass it, when we no longer need it, we feel a gratitude towards it. When the system mitigates between the individual and the cost benefit, reducing the costs to a minimum and increasing the benefits selectively, it really perpetuates stupidity, because then stupidity becomes more and more creative within the boundaries of the system's protection and its rules. That's when stupidity becomes really creative with language, because it no longer has to fear suffering any consequences. It can let its imagination go wild and invent all kinds of self-flattering, self-gratifying concepts. And this is the worst thing the system can do, because this perpetuates the nihilistic mutation, gives it the sense that it is indestructible, if not indestructible, that it can stand next to any other conception of the world. That's when everything becomes a game of fun and games. It's about having fun, about cracking jokes, about increasing sexual gratification, or whatever the organism finds the most ideal. Moderns believe that the multiplicity, the variation their nihilism can take, is evidence of their free thinking, of their open reasoning, of their motive. But this is how obtuse they are, how unphilosophical, irrational they are. In fact, it is the object that limits what the subject can perceive. It is order that limits the what is probable, because probable is another word for order. So in the infinite possibility, probability is a restriction of possibility. Therefore, once you've abandoned reality, the order of world, once you've dismissed the order in nature, there is no end to your creativity, how you can invent reality, how you can interpret based on selective perceptions the world. This, if you add it to the fact that they worship change as if it was always a good thing, exposes moderns as chaos worshippers, even though they will not know it and will never admit to it, because they have no self-knowledge and they have no way of comprehending anything above a certain level.